right, in this episode of Investors and Operators, I sit down with David Perez, co-founder of Avance Investment Management, and we're going to begin with a flash round of questions. First question is, what is your favorite meal at Victor's Cafe?
Oh, hands down, ropa vieja, black beans, rice, tostones, and maybe a mojito or two sliced in between there.
A mojito or two?
Yes.
Okay. Question number two. Are you wearing a special shirt?
Not today, but I have been known to wear a special shirt once in a while, particularly when I'm asking for money, yes.
Can you please elaborate just a little on that topic?
Well, Jordan, you know that fundraising is tough, and people who fundraise tend to be superstitious, at least I am. And sometimes when things go well, you tend to repeat what you did in that specific day, that specific moment. So there was a time during the fundraise of Avance where things were slow during the pandemic summer, and then Labor Day came, and I started wearing a blue shirt, not very different from this one. And I started realizing that all the meetings were going really well. So I thought about it, what am I doing different? And I go, darn, the shirt. So I started wearing that shirt again and again and again, and we started getting some traction. So I kept wearing that darn shirt again and again, all the way to our first closing in March of the next year. I'm embarrassed to say how many times I wore it.
How many times have you washed it?
Well, that's I was not allowed to wash the shirt. It's still hanging in my closet, and we're thinking about framing it.
Hermetically sealed, so nothing get in and out of it?
Yes, I've been not allowed to wear it for a while, but it's been saved for posterity.
All right. I think we have done an effective warm-up. The last question, actually, for the warm-up. When you think back to growing up, and if there was a particular dish or smell of the house, what brings you back?
So I grew up about 100 yards from the sea. So for me, every time I'm close to the sea and I smell salt water and that sort of humid weather with the that smell of the sea, that's home to me. So it's that smell of growing up very close to the water. In fact, recently I've been spending more time closer to the water, and it's brought me back some memories of being home. That's a strong smell that you remember.
It's interesting. I remember at 6:30 in the morning, my dad would make coffee, and just the smell of the coffee go down the stairs into the shower. Right. And as I was getting raised, a kid growing up, middle school and high school, was that smell. It's so every time I smell coffee, I think of my dad.
Right.
It's crazy. Yeah. Well, speaking of growing up, let's get the story. I have heard it for a number of months, and I just think it is truly one of the most fascinating stories that I think we might have ever had on this vlog, and that's 70 episodes. So not to say that the bar is high, but the bar is high. Let's get it out there. Let's take it back. Where did you grow up, and just what was it like?
Well, 70 episodes. I'll do my best. How about that? So I grew up in Cuba. I was born in the late 60s, 68 to be precise. And Cuba was, as you know, an island that at that point was in the middle of sort of under the socialist Russian influence. So I grew up there. I went to elementary school near home. And then I went to parts of middle school also near home. And then I went to boarding school when I turned about 11. Growing up, I have amazing memories. Cuba was, pretty integrated society, so a lot of friends. I grew up with friends in the block, kind of back what you hear here about stories in the 50s and whatnot. You used to come after school and play with the kids in the block, and those were your friends, and didn't matter whether your parents are more or less. You sort of grew up in that environment, went into each other's homes to eat and went out with each other, so in that sense, I had I have a very good memories from my upbringing. Our block is still pretty tight, stays in touch. We just essentially grew up in each other's homes, in and out. After school, as I mentioned, I went to boarding school, so I went away from home when I was 11. And I was a bit of a late bloomer, so I was really young for my age set and from my cohorts. My parents did the opposite of what's recommended today, and they pushed me forward a year from kindergarten to first grade. So not only was I young because I was a June birthday, I was pushed forward a year. So developmentally, I was close to 2 years behind my age set. So as a boy and in your teen years, that means they beat the crap out of you because they can, and you have to learn how to fend for yourself. And I did, and I think so. I spent 3 years in boarding school in the outskirts of Havana. It was a tough school to get into, so it was called Vladimir Ilyich Lenin School. You had to apply, and based on your grades, your GPA, they'll let you in. I was kicked out of that school eventually in 9th grade because I'm a big baseball fan, and I would escape after school and take 3 buses to go into Havana and watch baseball. And then I would take 3 buses and go back. And then one of those rides home at around 1 a.m., a bus broke. We had to walk along the side of the street, and some policemen picked us up. And anyway, threw me out of the school in the middle of 9th grade, which meant I went back to Havana and finished middle school and then high school near home, which was another great experience for me.
What did your parents do?
So my parents were essentially, I wouldn't call them intellectuals, but certainly my mom was an animal scientist. Worked in development, the whole animal scientist side of Cuba for many years. And my dad was a lawyer who turned into an economist. My dad had fought against the regime that was there before the Castro era, which is called the revolution. And he had fought with a group of students at the University of Havana. And he was part of the top few folks there. And after Castro came in power, he essentially was brought into, they created a unified government, and eventually my dad became, in the late 60s, part of that government. My dad was in fact, the head of the central bank there from the late 60s, from 67 to the 73 or so. And then after that, he fell in disgrace with as Cuba turned very communist in the mid-70s. I started copying the Soviet system with the 5-year plan and the Politburo and the Communist Party, by the way. My dad fell in disgrace, and then he was a bureaucrat, essentially, mostly as a CFO, using his economics training and background. And mom was an animal scientist, so 2 very different professions, but both of them were what I would call PhD level type education. So I grew up with with having very educated parents, and with the notion that I was going to improve myself by learning and by trying to be the best at that. And those were 2 very strong influences in my life.
How'd your parents meet?
That was a very interesting story. So my mom, by the way, she's still the longest living American in Cuba. So she's been living in Cuba since January 1959. And they met in the summer of 1955. Mom was a sophomore at Cornell University in the ag school. She had grown up on a farm in Cooperstown, which is about 2 hours from Cornell, and had gone to the ag school there. And then over the summer, she had planted some cucumbers one year and made like $300 selling those cucumbers. And she had an aunt who was in Paris at the time working, and Molly. And so she took a semester off from Cornell, and with those $300 and another loan she got from her dad, I think a couple $100, bought a ticket at the steamer and went over to Paris, studied at the Sorbonne for a semester. My dad was in a similar journey. He was.
Wait, how long did it take to go on a steamer to Europe?
I don't know. I would say several weeks. But this is how you travel
crazy.
back then. Crazy, no? So my dad was in a similar part of his life. He had graduated as a lawyer from the University of Havana. So dad was born in 32, so probably 20 years later, early 50s. And then he had worked as a lawyer, and I got involved in a movement to overthrow the prior regime. The secret police was after him, and essentially my grandfather took him out of Cuba and sent him to Europe for fear of his life. He studied a semester at London School of Economics, and then the second semester at the Sorbonne, and met my mom in a break. I think my mom, I don't know I'm allowed to say that anymore, but pulled out a cigarette in the courtyard, and my dad came with a lighter and lit that cigarette, and here I am, Eventful.
There we go. I've seen that in a couple movies. So they met in 55.
55. Yeah, met in 55. Then stayed in touch. Dad went back to Cuba, and my mom went back to Cornell to finish her degree, and then started a PhD program in insects and some other, animal scientist kind of things. And Dad worked as a lawyer, and then frankly, in his efforts to try to overthrow the government, his main job was to raise money in the U.S. and smuggle arms to send them down to Cuba. So he would go back and forth doing that, and I think that got him into trouble again. And by the late 50s, now in 58, the secret police came close to him and his friends. They escaped him by very little, and they jumped the fence over the embassy of Venezuela and sought asylum, and then they were transported to Venezuela and got out of Cuba. So Dad spent most of 1958 in Miami doing the same thing, raising money and helping send money down to Cuba to see how much trouble they could create. And my mom then had finished Cornell, moved down there, and spent 1958, she told me, in an apartment full of Cubans who couldn't work because they didn't have work papers. So my mom was the only one who could work. She was working during the day, at a department store, and at night she was cooking for 5 Cubans who, again, were just trying to raise money and overthrow the government. So that was then the Castro was won, or the prior government was overthrown at the end of 1958. My mom and my dad were in the first plane, one of the first planes, January 8th, 1959. And that's, she's been in Cuba ever since.
Well, we could just keep on diving into that. But so how, after boarding school, what was next? And you studied I know you studied in East Germany, but what was that journey like?
Yeah, so after high school, I got a scholarship to study in East Germany. I had to take German. I had to learn German, which I did in Havana. I had to retake high school in a year. I studied engineering, so I took chemistry, physics, math, and just language. So I did that intensively for a year, and that prepared me to go to East Germany, where I got in the summer of 1986. And
so you had to learn German
yeah.
to go take college classes.
Yeah, of course. They were only offered in German. So the first day I showed up, I had to understand the professor and be able to write down.
This was not entry-level German.
No, this was university. So that had its own. And listen, I lived my life fully in German for 4 years after that, to the point that when I arrived here in the summer of 1990, I had a thick German accent. So people thought I was German.
That natural blend of Cuban German.
Right. Exactly. So it was quite funny. People thinking I was German, but indeed I'd spent 4 years from 1986 to 1990 speaking only German, every day. So that sort of shaped my. But had a great time. There was a very eventful time. right what happened, right almost after I arrived, Gorbachev comes into power and he unleashes this perestroika movement, which is really an openness. The whole notion was that we were going to open up society and let information flow in a way that had never been allowed to flow in. And that created essentially the whole social movement, which ultimately resulted in an overthrow of all those regimes, because people started questioning the history, the reality, what was driving progress, whether the system worked, whether it didn't work. And it was much easier for a dictatorship to control something when it's closed and they control the information. When it's open, which is what happened a bit with perestroika, then this movement of glasnost, which is another word of opening, that came in, and all the other countries started opening up. So in the summer of 1989, fast forward 3 years when I'm there, one after the other, all those countries start basically rejecting their governments. And that resulted with the fall of East Germany and the reunification in October 1989, which in a strange way is what allowed me to come here. The country reunified, and I was able to reclaim my U.S. citizenship, which I had obtained through my mom's when I was born. And I went to the U.S. consulate in East Berlin and got a passport and made it. In the summer of 1990, on August 10th, I flew from the old Tempelhof airfield to Miami and started my life here.
Can you dive a little bit back into what it was like, when at that time when the Berlin Wall was falling, and just were you there by yourself, or were you there with like a class of others that were coming from Havana? Were you just like, hey, get on an airplane, you're in East Germany, you're a solo, or like what was it like towards the end, and like who else were you with in terms of?
Yeah, there were
like 20 other students.
Yeah, there were about 300 Cubans, I think, in total studying in East Germany, and probably about 25, 30 in Dresden. None in the sector that I was studying. I was studying process engineering, and for some reason I was the only Cuban that was studying that. There were 2 other women that were studying textile engineering, which is a related field. But as university there is very intense.
Yeah.
One thing, a little vignette that I learned when I got to the U.S. and I started at Cornell, and they sent me to the register. They said, well, you have to take this many courses and this many electives. And I remember saying, what the hell is an elective? It's like, elective is you get to choose the course. It's like, but I never had to do that. So in East Germany, they gave you 12 subjects, and you didn't get to elect anything. So the university life is very intense and designed to be a lot of work. So you don't see a lot of people. You're just focused on your academics. But listen, my life was great. It was, as I mentioned to you, very integrated with my East German colleagues, and I think part of this is partly how I became more acquainted with what was going on with glasnost and perestroika, because many of them were questioning themselves. I went to their homes. They were very generous with me, invited me to their homes for the weekends, the holidays, whatever. So I get to spend time with priests, with others, people who in Cuba you never had exposure to. In Cuba, if you were seen entering church back in the day, you'd be thrown out of high school. So the role that the religious establishment played in that transition was a very strong one. And so I had my life was integrated with my East German friends. I worked at nights and on weekends to make some money, which had a lot of benefits I'll get to in a second. But I have a great life. I mean, I go back, when I arrived in the US, people say, East Germany, that must have been horrible. I go like, East Germany was great. And they look at me like, what? It's like, yeah. It's the first time that I could go to a store and buy a beer, buy a sausage, buy whatever the heck you want with money. And granted, it was not the greatest, but I could go and buy it. I grew up with a ration card in Cuba. There was none of that. You went to the store and you got this much rice a month, and that was it. There was no free selection of what you could buy. And whereas East Germany has still, at least, it had food on the shelves, and that for me was great improvement. It had other things that are different from Cuba. It didn't have a lot of sun. People were, to some extent, less happy or less prone to happiness. But it had a lot of things that I liked as well.
Can you talk about if you're comfortable just kind of sharing it, just like I don't know if it was like a night, a week, when it was kind of towards that last months before you left, and just I remember you saying something about, when you were leaving, and just it was a little bit rushed.
I think you're referring to when East Germany unified with West Germany, it cut many of these countries that I send their students, many of the sort of closed countries, of which Cuba was one, but there was other ones, Syria and North Korea and some others. And I think those countries which had sent their students there, knowing that full well that they couldn't travel from there, that they had to stay there, all of a sudden they had open borders, and they were afraid that the students would take advantage of the opportunity and flee. So what happened, I think, was one night the North Koreans came in and essentially, quote unquote, abducted all their students. I think at around 2 a.m. they came in with a bus and took all their students and put them on a flight and flew them to North Korea. So at the end, we were all fearful that other countries, maybe even including Cuba, would consider that, and so we started, being a little more worried about what was going on and what would happen, and it was unclear what actions would be taken. Eventually, Cuba asked all their students to come back. It wasn't comfortable with that, but it was done in a more organized fashion. But it was a very stressful time. No one, not just for me, by the way, very stressful time for that country. People who had worked their entire lives in a system were asked to merge with another country where they had some of them have relatives, but they felt very insecure about their jobs, about what was going on. And some of that is played out now over the next few decades, but it created a lot of agita, including for my fellow students who didn't know whether their East German education will now be considered or acknowledged by the West German companies. And at the end of the day, everything worked out pretty well, but it was a time of high uncertainty, a lot of change, and that in the same for me. I mean, I didn't know what was going to go on. I decided during that transition that I wanted to come to the U.S. I wanted to pursue my life here, and that's what I did. I frankly didn't consult anyone or my parents or anyone. It just
how'd you get here? I mean, how'd you get the money to save up and come here? Or is it like, here's the address, parents, please send
No,
cash?
my parents didn't have any money, so it was not that. So I think I mentioned to you, I had a gig that I worked the night shift and the weekend shift at a factory that made toilets, and I worked from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. or something like that, with a 20-minute break. And the factory, the molds came in for the toilets, and then before they would go into the oven, they would open up, and me with an air gun would go in and make sure they were all smooth. There were no things that stuck and whatnot. So that was my gig. They paid me really well. I had to be all covered and whatnot. And through that, I made a lot of money, East German money, which then when West Germany and East Germany united, they exchanged about, I think it was 5,000 marks. I do remember showing up here with about $3,000 that I had obtained through my savings and through the West German government, which in a way was my venture capital. So that worked out really well. So I showed up, I bought the ticket. I think my ticket was like $400, and then I still had enough money to buy a beat up old Honda Civic. So that was my journey, and that's how I got here. And then I was very lucky that I found an arrangement up in Cornell where I didn't really pay tuition, nor did I pay room and board. So I was able to, live off that for close to a year.
Were you were going to school full time in addition to working at night?
Yep. I was asleep in the mornings, man, and when I had to go to sometimes I'd just go home, change, and went to class. It was intense. I mean, I couldn't do it. I could do it on the weekends, and I couldn't do it more than a couple of nights a week. This is essentially pulling an all-nighter on your feet. And Germans are very disciplined. When they said 20-minute break, it was a 20-minute break. If I wasn't standing there, the line would stop. So.
How did that experience shape who you are? And not just that experience. I mean, looking back to, the night shift, looking back at having to learn German in a year to go to university, and growing up with ration cards. Kind of looking back, how do you think that has really shaped who you are today, in things that are good and things that are, I didn't realize that other side of me?
Yeah, very, very good question. I mean, I would say my journey has just made me an optimist. Because when I look back, every experience was different, and every experience was, I wouldn't say better, but better than I thought, and better in different ways. And Cuba had great things. East Germany had some other great things. Then I came to the U.S. and whatever jobs that, I believe we're on this earth for just a little while. So you have to enjoy every piece, and whatever you get dealt with, yes, it's going to have some stuff that you don't like, but focus on what you can learn. Focus on what you can take to the next. And I'm an optimist, and I think that all those experiences have shaped me into being that. And it's been great in my professional career, but I think going and I love the journey that I've had, which has been upwards. I had grew up with relatively little in the sense of what you see today. As I mentioned to you, we didn't have everyone had the same thing. I think I got my first pair of jeans when my aunt came to visit me in 1979, and then I learned how to sew so I can expand them and work on them and whatnot. And so you have very little. I was the youngest of 7 cousins or so I wore the hand-me-downs from 7 kids, and that was great. And by the way, after me there were 3 other kids who got them, so we were used to that. And then in East Germany we had I had other experiences, and then I came here, and I think life has been great, and it's taught me to take advantage of opportunities too. So don't take anything for granted. Just focus. Try to see the good. Try to see the good in everything. I would, and then work hard. I mean, I've taken, I don't regret a lot of things. I just don't like to regret. I like to take advantage of them as they're happening. And if you can make mistakes, I've made a ton of mistakes, for sure. But those experiences made me, because my life has improved along the way, and I've had, a few setbacks and a few things haven't worked. But overall, I think different environments keep you on your feet. And, it's a little bit of what's played out in my profession lately, but but you need change. You need a challenge. You can't get complacent. And I think the degree to which my life has changed, I grew up speaking Spanish, went to college in Germany, have my professional life now in English. It's forced me to learn and to learn how to be in an environment where you don't have 100% information, you don't have 100% context. I remember what drove me crazy in this country when I arrived was that there were all this jokes and expressions about popular culture and shows, and none of which I watch. So you'd be in a conversation and they're talking about, oh, that reminds me of so and so from that show, and I'm like smiling, haha, what the heck? It's I don't know, I don't have the context. But it's the willingness to then engage in that and be comfortable without having to control 100% of the knowledge.
What do you think that your parents would say if they walked through this office with you?
I mean, that would, both of them would be very proud. I think my mom she hasn't been to the office yet, but she wants to come. We just started in April. Very proud. My dad was, he lived through, everything that I did, and, because he's, in a way, he was he was a very well prepared business person who could not fulfill his potential because of the limitations of Cuba. So he did the best he could, and he did amazing. But I always felt that if my parents had grown up or been able to exercise their professions in a free market environment, their lives would have been a little different. I don't know that it would have been better, to be honest. One of the things that Cuba gifted them and us and me, and in a very positive way, is we grew up with a lot of friends. Like, it was an open house in a way. People would show up at 5 unannounced, and at 5:15 to be the next person, and by 6 we had a party. And that's annoying sometimes, but it created that environment where I love to socialize. I love having gatherings. I have a party once a year with over 100 people, at least I used to. But I grew up with that. I grew up with that sort of. And by the way, you don't have to have a lot of money. The parties that I threw up in high school, I made up my own wine out of rice and mango and whatnot. So you can make up your own stuff and still have fun. And that's what Cuba. But going back to my parents, they would be immensely proud of, what I've done and what Avance is now becoming, and even some of my prior things that I've done, and also my personal life, my wife, my kids, who they got to know and spend some time with, and some of the other things that I'm involved with. I think I've channeled my parents, whatever I capture from they're all very engaged also with, helping neighbors, helping whoever they could. And I've taken a little bit of that. You succeed, you give back, you pay it forward.
What do you think, what does Hispanic Heritage Month mean to you? You've had this journey of 3 very different worlds, or 2 very different worlds. Mm-hmm. I mean, what do you think about it? Is it conscious, or is it just like another month, or is it like just kind of like a good reminder to pause? Like, what does it mean to you?
Listen, Hispanic Heritage Month is an awesome celebration. That this is what I find great about this country. We celebrate a lot of things. We celebrate, all the different. This country is a punch bowl. It's a mosaic of different groups that come and shape our history and our future and our present, and I love it when we celebrate that, and they're all very rich. That's what makes this society so rich and so successful, is that we're open to celebrating, to incorporating everyone. Hispanics in and of themselves are, again, another mosaic of different cultures. And if you think about the population and how what's making this country grow, the census numbers just came out, at least the highlights, and they show again that Hispanics accounted for over 50% of the population growth. If it weren't for Hispanics, this country wouldn't be growing. We're the only developed country in this world whose population is growing. So Hispanics, I would say, are important for the economy, are important for our national security, are important for the future, the workers. They're the youth. Hispanics are about close to 20% of the population, but over 30% of the youth. So that, how we celebrate them, how we empower them, how we make them part of this fabric, and incorporate them into every aspect of society. Wealth making, capital management, everything. Education is super important. So for me, I feel I'm being celebrated. I grew up, and terminology changes. I grew up a Cuban guy, then became Hispanic, then Latino, now I'm Latinx. Whatever you want to call me, I think Hispanic captures the heritage and the vibrancy of that movement. And I'm excited that we're recognizing Hispanics. I think they're a hardworking group with very strong values, very American. Hispanics is a very American story, in spite of recent, politicians saying otherwise. I couldn't think of a group that has, strong values. And there are many others, but Hispanics are amazing.
So let's shift gears a little bit and go to, the next part of your life, the professional career side. And I mean, what was the first job? When you came to the U.S., sorry.
All right, my first paid job. It was, I worked as an investment banker for a firm called James D. Wolfenson, not very far from where here, 53rd and Lex. I did M&A for 3 years, 2 years in New York, 1 year in London. Work my butt off. This is Wall Street in the early 90s, all-nighters, whatever. It was a small firm. I think I was, in my analyst class, it was just me, which I love. I learned how to model in Lotus 1, 2, 3.
Oh, you were used to the all-nighters.
Oh, yeah. Exactly. I trained in East Germany for those. I learned model and, back in the day. But it was great. It was a great experience for me. I learned business. I learned how to communicate. And then after that, I decided to go to business school.
So you went to HBS, and that's where you met Luis.
Right. So we started at HBS together in the fall of 1994, and there was a few Cubans in campus. So I think I was the only one who had actually come from Cuba. He had grown up in New Jersey and here in New York, and there were a couple of them like him. So we got together. I think we were a group of 4 or 5. And Luis and I, we were not in the same section, but we were across the hall, and got to know each other, play basketball. He's super competitive and a dirty player. He fouled me all the time. But I put up with that. We got into some fights once in a while, but we were making up.
Wait, who's better?
Of course I am. But
objectively speaking.
And then he brought us to Victor's, actually, and we organized like a Cuban gatherings with industry professionals here in New York. He would come down to Victor's.
What's Victor's?
Victor's Cafe, which is a restaurant here in Midtown, a couple of blocks away, which was Luis's family had started, and his grandfather, Victor, was still alive and ran it. And so we would come on the weekends for meals and whatnot and gatherings. And so, I spent 2 years with Luis, graduated in 96, and then we sort of went and pursue our own professional careers. HBS was great. As I tell people, some people ask me, should I go to business school or not? And I say, hey, listen, depends on your situation. My situation, I had not gone to college in the US, so I did not know a lot of people. So for me, it was a blend of college and business school. I learned a lot, and I got to meet a lot of people. And both of these things have been equally important in my professional career after.
So after HBS, what was the next step?
After HBS, I got into private equity. I did a stint in between years at HBS down in Brazil, in Sao Paulo, at a private equity firm. And then I got into private equity. One of my section mates used to work at Chase Capital Partner, and they were looking for a team to start their Latin America group.
Yeah.
So I joined. I did that for 2 to 3 years, 97 to 99. Great place to learn. They were a very big player back then, and a lot of things were happening there. Actually, in fact, the first wave of internet investments was happening back there. We backed some of the early players in LATAM, a company called Star Media that was a portal that ended up not doing well at the end, but companies like Mercado Libre and others who have become very important players and still around. By the way, Mercado Libre is the Amazon of LATAM. So we backed some of the early pioneers, and also learn a lot. Travel quite a bit to many of those countries, Mexico, Brazil, Chile, and learn the business.
And then, so did a couple years there, and then what was the next chapter?
So the next chapter is like, Milena and I got engaged in 1999, the summer. She started at HBS. And so we got engaged. I moved up with her. I quit my job at Chase. I traveled too much. And I wanted to spend time with my wife, my fiancée then. And I got recruited by Atlas Venture for a year, a venture capital firm, which I enjoyed too. And then after Milena graduated, or in between, I was also recruited by General Atlantic, a kind of a big growth global investor, which was investing in technology and growth-oriented businesses. So I moved to Greenwich, or I worked out of Greenwich, Connecticut for almost 3 years, and that was a great experience. Taught me a lot about growth investing, about being a global investor, about building organizations. And I did that for 3 years. And then I left in 2003 with the idea of building or investing or creating a firm that pursued the growth of the Hispanic demographic. Back then, the census had just come out, indicating that the Hispanic population had grown from 7.8% to 11.8% during the 90s. Today, by the way, it's almost 19 or 20. But back then, I said, hey, can we pursue this through a lower middle market private equity strategy? And thought about a few things, ultimately team up with and joined a firm called Palladium, where I spent about 16 years.
Well, what does Avance mean?
So the word itself means moving forward, but in Spanish. So you move forward, and we were looking for a word. I mean, by the way, picking a word these days to start a private equity firm is a major pain in the butt.
If you have anything to do with rock, river, mountain, taken. Right.
2 parts words, a color, and a this, and a this, and it's all kinds of stuff. So we ultimately, we looked at a lot of things, and this word just came up, and it felt right. There were a few other people with similar words, similar usage of that word, but no one in private equity that we could tell. So we just went for it, and it feels right. I mean, for us, it feels right on a couple different levels. Emblematic of the kind of work we've done in our careers with entrepreneurs. So team up with them, help them move forward. Emblematic of 50-some-year-olds in the middle of their careers and thinking about what they do next, move forward. And it's just emblematic also of a lot of the things that we want to do in our industry. Our people first culture, the things that we do around diversity or ESG. We don't want to build another private equity firm. We want to build something new and different. We want to help the industry move forward. So for us, all of that, how do we push ourselves and our industry forward is, we love the word.
Can you talk a little more about culture? Because I remember you were mentioning that book, Setting the Table. And I downloaded it, it's on my Audible, so I'm going to listen to it. But you were just talking about how much it has influenced how your team thinks about, just building the team, leading the team, managing the team. But just like, what are some takeaways for people who are watching this and listening to it on that book and how it's influenced you?
Yeah, and I mean, the book has been very influential. I mean, so what I would say to people is think about what you want to do in your life. And the most important thing is not to succeed, is not to make money, is to bring meaning into your life. When you get to 50, you realize that you don't have another 50 years. You have some dependent, but likely life is finite. So what is it that you want to do when you grow up, quote unquote? So in terms of bringing meaning to the life, we've all been practitioners in private equity for quite a while. And we've seen successful firms, we've seen less successful firms, we've seen how the industry deals with different issues. And one of the things that we were not happy about was, as the industry went from a cottage industry to a more institutional industry, that we saw some firms struggling with that. And I think the root cause from our perspective is how they treated people at all different levels. And I think when we went back and thought about what industries can we learn from, there were several industries that we've adapted different things from. Technology, we've copied some things. But one of the industries that we learn from is here in town in New York, and very successful. It's a hospitality business. And one of the entrepreneurs that we respect there the most is Danny Myers, and what he's done, revolutionizing that space. And by creating, a people-first culture at his establishments, his restaurants.
There's like Union Square Cafe, and then Shake Shack.
Shake Shack and a few others, and he's developed a number of other restaurants. But what he did, by the way, is he did away with tips. So he raised the salary of everyone to the point where he's very competitive, and through that he's able to pick the best people. But
were you trying to use that to get rid of bonuses?
No. But what he did, his theory is that if you treat people the best and you focus on them, they're going to treat others the best. They're not going to, and his thinking is that the most important constituency group in a restaurant is not the clients, it's not the investors, is the people who work there. And again, if they feel great, they're gonna that people who walk into this place are gonna sense that. They're gonna sense that the place is just working flawlessly. And so we said, well, that's really interesting because financial services has a lot of that. A lot of we're well-paid people, but not a great culture. Anything from feedback to how we manage our time and so forth. And so we. One of the goals of Avance, as we went about creating the firm, is how do we create a people-first culture. And that book describes the journey of how he thought about changing an industry that treated people very poorly for a long amount of time.
So let's do a lightning round of questions. And first, let's just kind of talk about some interesting. What are some lessons out there for people who are starting firms? And whether it's in private equity, private credit, investment banks, it doesn't matter. Like, what are some lessons in looking back and getting this thing off the ground with the team?
So what I would advise people to do is don't be afraid. Reach out to as many people as you can. There's always people out there who are willing to help you. You'll be surprised by how many people are willing to help you. So don't get stuck into your I need to be at this level to this level. Don't put artificial barriers on yourself, which is very very common in people. Don't be afraid of rejection. I mean, if you're afraid of rejection, it's tough to start a new firm. So put yourself out there again and again. Realize that you need a few rejections. In fact, you need several of them. You need to craft your message. You need to adapt. And then the last thing is learn. So the worst thing is to get a rejection without any learning. So, be a little critical of yourself. What did you do? How did you do it? Could you have done better? How do you up your game next time? How do you do it different, shorter, smoother? Try to bring your personality into it. Smile. Try to connect with people. At the end of the day, most businesses are a people business. So when and how people take your calls or your Zooms and whatnot is in my opinion, at least 50%. Do they like you? Do they want to connect with you? And the other 50% is the substance of what they're selling you, applicable. Do they want to benefit? There's a match. But don't forget that connecting with people is a huge part of the business. And then remember, you're building a business. Doesn't have to be successful day one. You're hopefully building a business for the long term. So approach those relationships and the building of those relationships with that in mind.
When do you like to make decisions?
Never. I joke with my kids, just as you know, that I used to have this framework that I wouldn't make decisions after 5 because I was tired, and my kids grew up with that till they overthrew that that part of me, and then my wife did too. It drove her crazy, but I wanted to think it through. I'm an engineer, remember? I want to think through everything. I want to be, rested, the whole thing. But seriously, try to make particularly important decisions when you have all your tool sets ready, which include you being rested, having a clear head, having the energy. Decision making is tiring. That's what people don't understand. Like the effort that goes into making a decision, if you take it seriously, is quite energy consuming. So it could be draining. So sometimes, this is why, by the way, I think a lot of people who eat the same thing or exercise the same thing, the reason they do it is because that's the easiest path in life. Just follow what worked and do it again. Like wearing the same shirt.
I literally have 2 shirts. I have this and a blue one that I work out in, and I have 4 of those. Yes. Last question. Where is Avance in 10 years?
Moving forward.
All right.